Welcome to Compound Insights, a podcast by CFA Society New York. I'm your host, Rob Rowan. Today we're talking with the CEO and founder of Tumlo, Georgia. She is an exceptionally interesting person who has a really interesting background, and I think that many of you have not heard or thought about some of the things that govern some of the voting and proxy voting that you might find kind of commonplace every day. So Tumlo's technology gives retail and institutional investors access to the votes that they are entitled to through their share ownership. For the investors in ETFs and other pooled investments, the benefits of this are pretty obvious. Now, for the asset managers listening, this is useful as the regulatory market in this area is expanding. So there are some differences between the regulations in the UK and the US. We'll touch on some of those. Now, Georgia was an equity investment analyst at Jupiter. She is a member of Aviva's Independent Governance Committee, and she studied natural sciences at Cambridge and has a bit of an ESG bent in the background. Maybe we'll get to that. So, Georgia, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
So one of the things that I think is interesting about how some of this has changed is some of it's come from the investors, some of it's come from the regulatory environment. So I'd like to start with, now that you have been doing this for 4 years, you have undoubtedly been in touch with a lot of asset owners around the service and the topic. Do you have a sense of how they, as a group, are changing their attitudes towards voting their proxies and other votes?
Yes, definitely. I think when we first started working on this topic of stewardship, people were very focused, at least in the UK, very focused on ESG and screening. So kind of negative and positive screening behavior in order to drive down, for example, the carbon footprint of one's portfolio. And now you see much more focus on using stewardship and including engagement and in voting to drive down, for example, the carbon footprint of a portfolio or achieve any other aims. But in the UK, there is a very big focus on net zero. And therefore, carbon and kind of climate change is a focus that comes up again and again, as well as other ESG issues like CEO pay or human rights. But generally speaking, the progress that asset owners are making seems to be in a kind of movement from reporting, which is a kind of basic requirement, through to having some influence on the voting and stewardship that their fund managers are doing, all the way through to, in some cases, looking to take control of the voting that their fund managers have been doing on their behalf. There are obviously differences kind of transatlantic, where in the US, the largest asset owners already have a large level of control because a lot of them are sitting in separately managed accounts or segregated mandates. Whereas in the UK, there is more, the distribution is kind of wider across smaller asset owners, and therefore there is much more use of pooled fund investments. And therefore there is less control automatically given to the asset owners who are making those investments than if they were in a separate account. Hence this discussion about how can I influence voting if I don't currently have control over that as part of the investment management process. But obviously, this is a big topic in the US, and we are also seeing movement on that side of the Atlantic.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have had some speakers in the past who said that the difference between ESG issues in the US and in the EU writ large are that in the US, they started on the regulatory side. And in most of the rest of the developed world, it started on the bottom end of the individual shareholders.
So. I think that's somewhat true. I would like to think that was 100% true. We've done a lot of work with pension members, and I would say generally, like pension members / retirement savers, so your 401k equivalents, they have very little understanding of what is included in a pension fund, and are not clamoring to drive sustainable pensions, because in the UK, at least, I think they don't understand the potential that their pension could have. Whereas when you do go to them and you educate them and you give them option to be able to have a voice, which is what Tumlo's technology actually started off by doing. It was basically going to pension communities and saying, hey, your pension fund wants to know what you think about all of these issues. Can you please tell us? And they used our software to kind of submit their opinions, essentially. Then we found people really do care, and they don't all care about the same issues. Some of them care about animal welfare, or human rights, or CEO pay, or gender equality. It wasn't all climate. But I think it really takes you to go into a pension member's life, like to intrude into their email inbox before they start telling you that they really care about sustainability or things associated to that. So in the UK, there definitely still has been a regulatory drive, and that's the same across the EU, where the governments at large have made net zero commitments that they are intending to stick to, and see the pension system and other investment systems as a way to drive change and investment in kind of the local economy and renewable infrastructure and that type of thing, in a similar way that it's happening in the US. So maybe it's a bit of a combination.
Yeah. Do you get a sense that some of this is driven by asset owners as a large group? As you rightly point out, there are a lot of different permutations of that. But asset owners as a large group, I think, are reflecting on their fiduciary duty differently
100%.
over time. Are you seeing that?
Yes, without a doubt. And actually, that's, there are very live debates that I don't know how long they would survive in the US, but about the definition of fiduciary duty. And, is it about short-term performance, or is it about long-term consideration of someone's retirement outcome, which obviously would include their financial performance of their investments, as well as perhaps the society that they retire into or the environment that they retire into, and whether actually a pension fund trustee's fiduciary duty would actually potentially cover all of those things. Like, maybe that's a really big ask of a pension fund trustee. It is a really big ask of a pension fund trustee, but that's definitely a live debate, I would say, among asset owners in the UK. And you do see asset owners in the UK behaving in that way. So, for example, we have got big pension funds who represent gig economy workers, and they will look to vote in a specific way on workers' rights issues. And that's not a reflection of, I mean, it might be a reflection of the worldview that they have as it relates to financial performance, but it's likely also incorporating their beliefs about what is the best outcome in the long term for the people that we're managing money for. And also, you obviously see some of this from various movements in the US as well. There's a live conversation there too.
Yeah, I think this, one of the reasons it's difficult to generalize in the U.S. is because we have 50 sovereign states. So when you're talking about public pension plans in the U.S., there's a big range in there because of the individual issues on each of the states. But do you think there is also a sort of, maybe not a fiduciary responsibility, a shift in sensibilities that's happening that you can see in that respect?
Yeah, I think part of that might be driven by different demographics coming into the pension fund management space. I refer to pension funds, I suppose, because they are the biggest kind of class of asset owners. But obviously, this is the same for sovereign wealth funds and for other types of endowments. Just institutional clients at large are being run by different people as people retire and as new people come in, and being influenced perhaps by their children. I absolutely do think that the kind of emotional view of these issues is changing, and people's value sets are changing. And it's not possible, I think, to run your life and run your work without your values being somewhat incorporated into the things you do. Where even if you believe fiduciary duty is about driving financial performance only, and that's the only thing that's the best interest of your clients, you are still going to do that within the realm of what you think it is right, which is going to in some shape or form incorporate your values. So I do think that sensibilities of people are changing, and that is going to drive a change in how asset owners look to influence or take control of voting.
Yeah, it's I think it's funny when there's sometimes feels like there's a divide between that first responsibility about investment returns, because anyone who's been in the market for a while recognizes that most change happens on the margins, and change is the only constant in the market. There is no stability, and so sometimes I think people sort of forget that when you look at the markets, there is nothing but change. That's all it is. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this from sort of the other end of the business, if you will, of Tumlo's business, if you will. When you see other folks other than asset owners, and you see, you must have a massive amount of data that comes through all the time on how people are voting. I'm sure that most of us have some expectations about, certain types of people vote this way, certain types of people vote that way. Can you confound that? Can you slaughter any of our sacred cattle here.
I think, but yeah, there are definitely some myths and some stereotypes flying around. I mean, one interesting myth, I suppose, is the role of the proxy advisors. I think it's very easy to generalize their role in the industry. They have generally got lots of policies that they offer, and some of the thematic policies versus standard policies, like whether you could have a Catholic policy or an ESG or a climate focused policy, and they all will make different recommendations. So I think some of the rhetoric about ISS and Glass Lewis and kind of what they stand for is interesting in light of the fact that actually they offer a suite of products. And what I think we will see actually is more diversity, perhaps coming from them, more diversity from competition in the proxy advisor space. I think there's a lot of more room, although it is an economies of scale game, for diversity of opinion and view, and for people to be able to align with different policies. On the whole, actually, the proxy advisors their thematic policies tend to support shareholder proposals on average more than the large asset managers do. So you've got one side of the fence who I think would argue the proxy advisors are not progressive enough. And obviously you've got people, especially in the US, saying the proxy advisors are too progressive and are kind of driving specific agendas. And actually, it's obviously it's all relative, but it's not quite as simple as that. There's a lot more nuance, I think, to that view. On the client side, I would say that probably what we see and hear from clients might be different than what you expect, although obviously it depends what you expect. Like with the local government pension scheme, so the public pension funds here in the UK, they're very interested in executive remuneration, as well as climate issues, but actually executive remuneration really comes up a lot, more than I initially expected it might. Obviously, it's an important issue. And similarly, among beneficiaries, actually, climate change is important and it does come up. It's a big topic in the UK anyway, and there is generally quite a high level of consensus on it as being an important issue. But issues like gender equality in the workplace, human rights, workers' rights, animal welfare even, are topics that often are above the agenda on climate change. And that was a learning for me, perhaps because I just thought that's what everyone cared about. And actually it's perhaps easy to see that people are going to care about things that feel more tangible to them. And we do see that across different demographics. So, people in their women in the later part of their career are more likely to have experienced perhaps the effects of gender inequality and are more likely to feel kind of impassioned about that and vote on that issue. And therefore, their opinion will come through. Whereas other people might be more interested in executive remuneration or workers' rights, for example, if they're in gig economy roles. I would definitely say that some of the data we've had has bucked the myths that I held before.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. I do think these are often really valuable places for all of us to learn, once again, from things we might have taken for granted.
And I just to add to that, I think just on what you're saying, that point you're making exactly is, I think, the benefit that asset managers are getting from this experience, where lots of asset managers are, for the first time in the last 18 months, going out to their clients and saying, if you could vote, well, actually, we're going to give you the ability to vote. How will you vote? And that's opening up a whole other kind of channel of communication with clients. And in some instances, fund managers are launching what we call in the UK expression of wish, which effectively is a formal way for clients to input onto their stewardship strategy, either on a vote by vote basis or a kind of high level, rather than pass-through voting. Whereas some fund managers are opting for pure pass-through voting, where actually their asset owners are able to kind of overlay a policy or override fund manager votes on individual issues. But for many fund managers, that might be the first time that they're hearing from kind of their less vocal subset of clients.
Interesting. Yeah. So it does give a interesting opportunity to fund managers to be able to be more on the front foot with this and approach topics and perhaps end up with a stickier client. Who knows, somewhere down the road.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've had, just talking about our experience with asset owners, because I think the whole world is quite early in this journey of, what does shareholder democracy look like? What is pass-through voting? What is expression of wish? How are these things all going to bottom out? And I guess some of the things that we're seeing anecdotally from asset owners, which might be helpful, would be, for example, where they might be an issue-led asset owner and they're really happy with 95% of the fund managers voting, but there are specific votes that kind of they can't let go of, whether that's executive remuneration or climate, and they want to be able to overlay their own strategy. That would be one example of an asset owner use case. Another might be where they already have a segregated mandate and they're using maybe a passive fund manager for the kind of all the reasons you would use a kind of all world index passive fund. And they want to overlay the vote strategy onto that passive fund. And if you can think about it from their perspective, they're already paying for a voting policy. They've already put in all the hard work to decide what they want on their seg mandate. Of course, they want to overlay that onto their passive, if they can, their passive pooled fund. And so we're seeing that. And then I guess finally, we're seeing asset owners who perhaps don't yet have a policy, but want to pick one that they feel like aligns with the needs of their beneficiaries or the outcomes that they're looking to achieve over whatever time period. And they really want choice in the policies that they have, not necessarily to pick from one or two, but potentially to be able to kind of align themselves with something that an asset manager might not possibly have offered before. So that's the type of thing that we're seeing.
Okay, that is absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Georgia. This is more than I could hope for. I like to take the temperature of people who have their hand in one part of the plumbing, if you will, like of this. Last week we interviewed someone who has great knowledge into the view into the repo market.
Okay.
Which is another part of the marketplace that I think is exceptionally interesting to look at. So thank you for much of the great data. Thank you for the insights. It's been exceptionally helpful, and we will have you back. Because this, as you rightly point out, this is all nascent. This is all just beginning.
Yeah, very.
And we will we'll have you back to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
And thank you to the members who dialed in to CFA Society New York's podcast, Compound Insights. Until next week, I've been your host, Rob Rowan.